We know that arguments have been made that including the Charter of the French language in the Official Languages Act will not diminish the rights of English-speaking Quebecers. I suggest that those arguments were perhaps conceived before C-13 was amended to include a reference to the Quebec law in the purpose clause of the Official Languages Act. Our legal assessment has always been that to mention Quebec's French language charter within the Official Languages Act does pose a danger to our community's rights. This becomes even clearer in the version of the bill that is now before you. You've heard from the dean of one of the world's most respected law schools that this inclusion could have serious and lasting effects on language rights. A former Supreme Court justice has pointed out to this committee that the two language regimes, Canada's and Quebec's, are not compatible. They are fundamentally different. They have different purposes to achieve different aims. Yet they are now being forced together with the help of an undisclosed agreement between Canada and Quebec. It represents a monumental change to the quasi-constitutional Official Languages Act, and it has implications for Canada's unity. We submit that withdrawing the references to the Charter of the French language from C-13 would in no way diminish or abrogate the rights of or support to French-speaking minority communities. There is, however, danger in retaining those references, danger to the English-speaking community of Quebec, and also danger in setting up an official languages regime that creates a precedent for other provinces to impose restrictions on their own linguistic minorities, as Quebec has done. And if the committee wants examples of those restrictions, we can give them to you in the question period.
That is Joan Fraser, former Canadian senator, former journalist, speaking to senators as they have to now decide whether to approve the amendments in that Bill C-13, the amendment to the Federal Languages Act, or not, or send it back and remove some of those, including the three mentions, not just in the preamble as we found out, but within the bill itself, referencing Bill 96, Bill 101 before it. Joan Fraser is on the phone. Thank you so much for being here.
A pleasure.
Can we begin with what you said? Because I will tell you, when we first played that yesterday, we received so many text messages from people saying, finally someone's standing up, finally someone's saying what needs to be said in a cogent way. I wonder, though, at the end of all this, what actually happens? Because when I asked the question yesterday of Tom Mulcair, for example, and I said, Tom, for all the people, and I know Eva Ludwig was there as well from Quebec community groups making her points, is this a rubber stamp for this Senate? And he said, yeah, it probably is. What's your take?
I'm very much afraid that Tom is right. The government is pressing very hard for this bill to be passed into law before they all rise for the summer break. And for it to be passed into law by then, it would have to go through the Senate unamended. The bill has many friends particularly in Francophone minority communities. The Fédération des Francophones Acadiennes appeared at the same Senate committee hearing that we did, and their praise was ecstatic, over the top, saying, pass this bill now, don't wait another day. So the representatives from the Francophone minority communities, and there are quite a few of them in the Senate, are all very much in favor of the bill. And as I say, the government is pressing very hard for it to be passed. The government leader in the Senate, who is actually an English Montrealer, Mark Gold, spoke at second reading and gave unqualified support, as you would expect, because he's the government representative. But it's very clear that the pressure is on for this bill to be passed, as is.
And therein lies, it would seem to me, as you described this part of the quandary here, right? The issue is, yes, for Francophone rights in the rest of Canada, this is a wonderful bill, and I think you alluded to that basically in your statement, but obviously for Anglos in Quebec, it's a completely different situation. Is there no way to separate one from the other?
Well, we believe that, for starters, removing the references to the Charter of the French language would be very helpful, because when you put in those references, particularly in the purpose clause of the Official Languages Act, you say basically that the courts must interpret, and indeed federal government policies must take into account Bill 96. And that, as far as we're concerned, is a serious danger signal for the English-speaking community. So it could be done. If I had my druthers and I were running things, I would also pay serious attention to the second part of Bill C-13, which is a whole new bill on the use of French in federally regulated private businesses in Quebec. And that bill is very closely aligned with Bill 96. It talks about promoting French everywhere with almost no protections for English or for Anglophones. Little bit of protection for employees who are already employed and who don't speak fluent French, as long as they don't try to get promoted. And the bill says, well, businesses may serve their customers in French, may provide documents in English, may provide documents in English or another language for that matter. But what they must do is have everything in French. And particularly for smaller businesses, if they have to do it in French, they'll do it in French. Will they want to spend the extra money to get everything translated into English as well if they have a lot of English employees? Maybe not.
I'm curious if, in doing what you're doing, in making the case that the Charter is a threat to Anglophones, do you have the impression that you are being heard by the senators?
Well, the Senate is a collection of individual senators, and I think we have had a more careful reception from some than from others. In particular, of course, Judith Seidman and Tony Lafreda, who are English Montrealers and who have spoken quite strongly about the inclusion of the Charter of the French language in a federal law. But some others have indicated some understanding. For example, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Senator Poirier from New Brunswick, indicated in her second reading speech that yes, she understood Anglophone concerns, and she understood that those concerns had not been allayed in any way, but she said, I'm going to vote for the bill, and we have to do it quickly. So, it's kind of frustrating.
Well, what is the, this do it quickly part that is what I don't understand. And yes, I understand that in the rest of Canada, as we said earlier, for Franco-Canadians living there, they've had to deal with this law, the language law as it is for many, many years. But do you get the sense that it's not worth spending the extra time needed to make sure that, yes, they can be taken care of and they can get the services they need and have access to them, but at the same time recognize the problems this causes potentially for Anglos in Quebec?
I think the head of the FCFO, when she spoke, made the point that in a minority government you never know what's going to happen. And it was quite clear she was afraid that for some reason the government would fall if this bill were delayed, and that the government might fall before it got passed in an unamended form. And I think that's a real fear among Francophone minority communities, because there are lots of good things in this bill. There are even some good things for English Quebec as well. But they just worry, and they've waited a long time, and they've worked very hard to try to get a new modernized Official Languages Act up and running. And so they really, really, really want it to go fast. And then, of course, you've seen the periodic eruptions of sentiment in Quebec to the effect that anybody who is opposed to or even wants to amend this bill to solve our concerns is anti-French, anti-Quebec. So few political parties want to run into that buzzsaw.
We're out of time. I did want to ask you one last thing. Maybe this is unfair, how disappointed will you be if and when this does pass?
Very, but not surprised. Very disappointed. Very, very disappointed.
All right. We will leave it at that. Joan Fraser, we thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.